In order to maximize your true 1RM strength, there is a very popular strategy in powerlifting. It's called peaking, and it's how you reveal your absolute strength on a specific day. When I compete during the Powerlifting World Championships, I always make sure my peak is on point in order to maximize how much I can actually lift. So, whether you want to get ready for a competition or you want to try a new bench PR, you should get your peaking right. And in today's video, I'll share with you my pro tips on how to perfect your peak so you can hit your biggest lifts when it matters the most. To properly peak, we first need to make sure we know what it's all about. Peaking is basically the process of reducing training fatigue so that all of your strength is ready to be expressed on one day. Usually, in order to build your overall strength on a lift, you need to go through an accumulation or a volume phase. It's really necessary as it allows to build a better technical pattern, promote muscle growth, and also train your CNS to the specific lift you want to improve. But also during an accumulation phase, it's easy to build up fatigue, which obviously is not optimal in order to express your true 1RM strength. So although we need this accumulation or volume phase, we also need to enter into a peaking phase for two main reasons. Number one, through the accumulation phase, we lay the foundation of the strength gains. But usually, we need to do some changes for those gains to be properly transferred to our 1RM strength. For example, during an accumulation phase, you're usually handling more moderate intensity as it's easier to build volume with it. So for example, you'll do a set of 5 reps with, let's say, 78% of your deadlift 1RM. But if you're preparing to beat your previous 1RM, you also need to lift heavy weights as it's mandatory to really have the full picture and get the most amount of gains possible. And so doing a set of 5 with 78% of your 1RM will be quite different from attempting, let's say, a new PR on your deadlift 1RM. And that's exactly the reason as to why we need this peaking phase in order to transfer the strength we've accumulated through the volume phase. So usually the beginning of our peaking phase will be about lifting heavier weights for maybe less reps, but getting our bodies and our CNS primed for those heavy lifts. Like I said, during the accumulation volume phase, you're usually building up fatigue also. This seems pretty straightforward, but if on Mondays, for example, you did a 5x5 with pretty challenging weights, the next day or even 2 days later, your body might be fatigued, you might be sore, and obviously those are not optimal conditions in order to try a new bench press PR. But at the same time, like I said, we need this fatigue build up in order to also develop our strength, develop our muscle mass, have some CNS adaptations, and so on and so forth. So usually the second half, so the latest part of the peaking phase, will be about doing a taper, which will allow us to reduce the fatigue, so much so that we keep all of those gains, but because the fatigue is lower, we can really express our true 1RM strength. So that's essentially how we can manage the peaking for powerlifting. So like I said, we have a first half of the peak, which is about lifting heavier weights, but for less reps, usually a bit less volume, but more CNS adaptations. And then the second half of the peaking, which is about doing a taper in order to reduce that fatigue and allow for the best result possible. The peaking has to be individualized. Obviously, depending on how many sets you're already doing, what kind of intensity, things will be different. But my goal here is to give you some general guidelines that you can follow in order to properly have your peak make its effect. And that's usually how I personally do my peaking on my powerlifting programs. So the peak is actually, like I said, divided in two sections. For the first half, you want to lift heavy weights with low reps. So usually you'll do sets of 1 up to maybe 4 reps with a percentage of your 1RM depending on how many reps you're doing. Here is a chart that you can use for reference. And if some of you guys are already subscribed and already follow this channel, you probably know that I really like the sets of 1 and the sets of 3 reps. Now, as to how many sets you should do every week, this again will depend on how well you can recover, on your technique, and so on and so forth. I usually recommend you do between 3 and maybe up to 6 of those heavy sets every week per lift, per movement. Obviously, not all of the lifts are equal. So for example, on deadlifts, you'll probably be more around 3 heavy sets per week during your peaking. And obviously for the bench press, because it's easier to recover from, maybe that's where you'll do more like 5, maybe up to 6 heavy sets every week. You want to follow this first half of the peaking for approximately 2 weeks. You can do it for 1 week, but maybe that just won't be enough in order to transfer all of your gains from your volume phase. But in my opinion, 2 weeks is really the sweet spot. By then, usually you're stronger. You probably feel much more confident and comfortable on those heavy weights. But at the same time, your fatigue must be really high at this moment. And that's exactly where we're transitioning into the second half of the peaking that we do with the taper. Tapering means reducing the overall intensity and volume that you've accumulated on your training block to allow for true 1RM strength on a specific day. Now, how much you have to reduce things, like I said, will be very dependent on you, your program, how well you can recover, and other stuff of that nature. But here is a general rule of thumb depending on every lift. Deadlifts will be the lift that you'll taper the most. It's the most taxing lift out of the 3. All of your body is well challenged during a deadlift, so that's why you can taper it pretty aggressively, especially if you're pulling conventional, because usually you have more range of motion than you would have if you were to pull sumo. This is very different to the bench press because it's without a doubt the lift that you can recover the easiest from out of the 3. So you still want to keep some volume and intensity on the bench, even the week of your competition. Finally, for squats, it's really a middle ground. In my experience, it will depend a lot on your leverages, your technique, your range of motion. But in general, keeping some intensity, some volume early in the week of your competition or 1RM strength day is important, but then obviously you want to taper things down. So now I'll give you an example of how my peak looks like, especially the week of the competition. I really want to have my last heavy deadlifts 1 week out from my competition. So if I'm competing on a Saturday, for example, the Saturday prior will be my last heavy deadlift set. Then on the week of the competition, I still want to deadlift approximately 4 days out. It will mostly be some easy technical pulls, but they're still important in order to not detrain and keep your technique ready. So usually, like I said, 1 week out, last heavy deadlift, and then 4 days out, last technical pulls. For the bench press, like I told you, I really don't taper it that much. I'll still lift heavy the week of the competition, usually having a practice single with approximately 90% of my 1RM 2 or 3 days out. I'll still drop my volume on the last session, and I'll still drop it like quite intensively, approximately 40% of my volume, because you still want to feel fresh under the bar when you're about to compete or try out your new 1RM. So don't reduce intensity of volume too much on the other days, but on your last bench press session, which will be approximately 48 hours out, that's where you want to drop the most amount of things, and again, volume by approximately 40%, which is quite substantial, I would say. And finally, for squat, I'll keep 1 heavy set the week of my comp, usually on a Monday, but then I want to drop the intensity of my back off sets. Finally, pretty much like the deadlift, I still want to squat approximately 3 days out, but it will mostly be some technical squats, so not very heavy, maybe 60-70% of my 1RM for more reps in order to keep the motion, keep my technique, and not feel completely detrained by the time I compete. So those are the recommendations that I follow, and I obviously also recommend you follow in order to maximize your peaking for 1RM strength. Now, before I give you my do's and don'ts of the peak week, I just wanted to say, if you want to follow some powerlifting programs with a peak phase and with a taper phase, I have more than 15 powerlifting programs all available on my training app. With just 1 monthly subscription, you can access any of those programs, and you can cancel your subscription at any time. So if you do want to get stronger and follow my powerlifting programs, I'll meet you on thepanash.app. And now we're back to the video. So for the do's and don'ts, there are actually some mistakes that you do want to avoid. The first one is one that I made because that was a very popular idea in France when I started powerlifting, and it's not training the week of your competition. Yes, fatigue can be detrimental to absolute 1RM strength, but at the same time, like I said, fatigue is a byproduct of training, and you need to train in order to get stronger. So if you're afraid of being fatigued and you simply stop training the week of your comp, yes, you'll get there feeling fresh, but at the same time, you won't know how to squat, how to bench, how to deadlift. During my first ever powerlifting competition, I remember when I had the bar on my back, I was like, oh, what am I supposed to do with it? I was really lost, and that's not a very good feeling to have when you're about to squat your 1RM. So in order to avoid that, you need to train the week of the competition. If you follow the guidelines that I gave you a bit earlier, that shouldn't be a problem for you, but I really want to emphasize on that point. Yes, fatigue is detrimental to absolute 1RM performance. You still need to have some fatigue, but not so much that you're completely crushed and you cannot lift your weights. Another big mistake you want to avoid is feeling the necessity to try out in training what you want to attempt on the platform or on your test day. Training is a process. Like I said in the intro of this video, you want to go through different phases, and each phase has its own strength, and then you want to add up all of those strengths in order to end up very strong on your training cycle. But if you decide to just YOLO everything and you're like, in 1 week I want to lift 315 pounds, 140 kilos, then I must do it in training in order to be able to do it on the platform, that's not how it works. By doing so, if you decide to randomly max out 1 week out or some days out, you'll simply overreach, you'll run yourself into a wall, and with just some days of recovery, that just won't be enough. So if mistake number 1 was about not doing enough the week of competition, mistake number 2 is maybe doing too much. Thinking, oh, I must do this exact weight, otherwise I won't be in shape to do it on the platform. No, usually you want to have some training stress that will create some fatigue, and then with the taper that I just gave you, you want to lower all of that fatigue in order to have your absolute strength some days later. And something that has been hard for me to accept as a powerlifter, but everybody should accept, is not every day is going to feel strong. Some days are just going to feel rough. It's okay, take it, do what you have to do, and then move forward. Third and final advice, final thing to absolutely avoid, don't go crazy, don't go bonkers on your accessories the week of your competition. And in my opinion, if you're a powerlifter, you should remove your accessories on the week of competition. But don't get me wrong, accessories do matter. They help us to build more muscle mass, which is good for strength. They can also strengthen some weaknesses that we may have as athletes, but at the same time, during the week of your competition or your strength 1RM day, the accessories are done. Like, they don't serve any more purpose than that. By keeping them or going crazy heavy with those, you will create some fatigue that won't benefit you in the short term for your goals. Accessories will benefit you for the medium or long term, but not for the short term. And that's why I personally don't do any accessory on the week of my competitions. And if I do accessories, it will be very, very light. Like, for example, it will be 50% intensity of what I usually do. So extremely light, just to keep some motion. If, for example, you feel the need to keep a certain exercise, then obviously you reduce tremendously the intensity, the volume, and everything. And yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. That's how I usually handle my peaking phases and my taper phases for powerlifting or whenever I want to try a new 1RM in the gym. I hope this video was helpful. I hope you enjoyed it. If that's the case, as always, one of the best ways to let me know is to subscribe to the channel, to leave a comment, and on my end, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Oh, and by the way, we have a new poster. Rate it in the comment section. Like, I think in my opinion, it's definitely a 10 out of 10. I still have to order an Attack on Titan one because we said we would have an Attack on Titan. So next posters will get Attack on Titan and also Blackbeard, because as you guys know, I've been practicing my Blackbeard love. I'm pretty proud about it. So yeah.